I never knew what it meant to have a complete family. My mother, Elena, died when I was barely 5 years old, leaving just me and my father in a house that always felt too big for the two of us. The Victorian-style home with its creaking floorboards and sunlit bay windows belonged to my maternal grandparents, who had left it to my mother before their own passing. Dad Logan, to everyone else, did his best raising me alone. He coached my soccer teams, learned to braid my hair badly at first, then with surprising skill, and always made sure we had dinner together, even if it was just takeout on busy nights. For years, it was just us against the world, Evelyn and Logan Parker, the inseparable duo. "We're a package deal, Evie," he'd say whenever I asked if he was lonely. But I saw the way his eyes would sometimes drift to the empty side of the couch, the phantom space where my mother should have been. There were a few women when I was around 11 coffee dates that Dad would rush off to while I stayed with Mrs. Harmon next door. I'd watch from the window as he'd check his reflection in the car mirror before driving away. He always came home early, hanging his jacket with a sigh that told me everything I needed to know. None of those women ever made it through our front door. Until Diane. I was 16 when Dad brought her home, his fingers nervously adjusting his collar as he called me downstairs. "Evie, honey, there's someone special I'd like you to meet." Standing in our living room was a woman with auburn hair, styled in elegant waves, and piercing green eyes that seemed to catalog everything they touched. She wore a fitted black dress that looked expensive, and the diamond pendant at her throat caught the light when she turned to smile at me. "This is Diane," Dad said, and I didn't miss the way his voice softened around her name. "Diane, this is my daughter Evelyn. It's wonderful to finally meet you," she said, extending a manicured hand. "Your father talks about you constantly." Before I could respond, the front door opened again, and two teenagers walked in. The boy, tall with dark hair that fell across his forehead, barely glanced up from his phone. The girl, probably around my age, surveyed our home with critical eyes, her gaze lingering on the outdated wallpaper in the hallway. "And these are my children," Diane said, gesturing them forward. "This is Tyler. He's in his first year at State University. And this is Vanessa. She's 17. Tyler grunted something that might have been a greeting. Vanessa's eyes locked with mine, and the slight curl of her lip told me everything I needed to know about how this arrangement was going to work. Later that evening, while Dad and Diane were in the kitchen preparing dinner, Vanessa cornered me in the hallway. Her perfume was overwhelming, something floral and expensive that made my eyes water. "Let's get one thing straight," she said, crossing her arms over her designer sweater. "Just because our parents are dating doesn't make us sisters or friends. I have my life, you have yours. Let's keep it that way." I could have said something should have. Maybe, but the happiness in Dad's eyes when he looked at Diane made me swallow my words. It had been so long since I'd seen him genuinely smile that I couldn't bring myself to rock the boat. Things moved quickly after that. Within 6 months, Dad and Diane were married in a lavish ceremony that Diane had planned down to the last rose petal. 2 weeks later, moving trucks appeared in our driveway, and suddenly our spacious home was overflowing with their possessions. Tyler took over the guest room, filling it with gaming equipment and the persistent smell of aftershave. Vanessa claimed the study, which we converted into a bedroom complete with a vanity where she spent hours perfecting her social media presence. Diane's things multiplied like rabbits, specialized kitchen gadgets, decorative pillows, framed photos of her and her children that slowly pushed our family pictures to the periphery. I started waking up earlier just to have a few minutes of peace in the bathroom, before Vanessa's hour-long beauty routine or Diane's meticulous makeup application. My bedroom became my sanctuary, the only space that remained untouched by the newcomers. But I bit my tongue and forced smiles because Dad was humming again. He was leaving work on time and laughing at the dinner table. For the first time since Mom died, the shadows behind his eyes had receded. If my happiness was the price for his, I was willing to pay it. Everything changed the night Dad came home with news that would alter the rhythm of our lives. He burst through the front door, tie loosened and a grin stretching across his face. "Regional Sales Director," he announced during dinner, holding up his water glass in a toast. "Can you believe it?" While Diane immediately launched into plans for renovating the kitchen and buying a new car, I focused on the detail. Dad mentioned almost as an afterthought, I'll be traveling extensively, of course. That's part of the position. How extensively? I asked, the fork pausing halfway to my mouth. 2, maybe 3 weeks at a time, he replied, already turning back to Diane, who was scrolling through luxury car options on her phone. The first time Dad left for a business trip, something in Diane changed. The warm, attentive woman who had charmed my father disappeared like smoke, replaced by someone I barely recognized. The moment Dad's car pulled out of the driveway, she turned to me with steel in her eyes. "Evelyn," she said, her voice crisp and commanding, "we need to establish some ground rules while your father is away." Those ground rules turned out to be a list of chores and restrictions that made me feel less like a family member and more like staff. I had to be home by 4:30 p.m. sharp, no exceptions, not even for my debate team practices or study groups. "But I have debate on Tuesdays and Thursdays," I protested. "It's important for my college applications." "Then you'll have to quit," Diane replied without hesitation. "Someone needs to help with dinner and housework." The next few weeks established a crushing routine. I'd rush home from school, change clothes, and immediately start on my list of chores. Floors needed mopping, windows needed cleaning, vegetables needed chopping, all while Vanessa lounged on the couch, scrolling through social media and occasionally filming herself for her growing fashion channel. Tyler was rarely home, but when he was, he left a trail of dishes and laundry that somehow became my responsibility. One evening, as I scrubbed pots while Vanessa blasted music from her phone, I finally spoke up. "Why doesn't Vanessa have to help with any of this?" Diane's head snapped up from her magazine, her eyes narrowing. "Vanessa needs to focus on her college preparations. She's applying to Ivy League schools. She can't waste time on housework." I glanced at Vanessa, who was now taking selfies with different facial expressions, definitely not studying for the SATs. "But she's just what?" Diane's voice had that dangerous edge that had become familiar over the past weeks. "Nothing," I mumbled, turning back to the sink full of dishes. The most infuriating part wasn't even the endless chores or the unequal treatment it was watching Diane transform whenever Dad called. She would immediately adopt an exhausted expression, her voice dropping to a weary timbre. "Oh, Logan, you have no idea how challenging it's been," she would sigh when Dad checked in. "Managing everything on my own, taking care of all 3 kids. And Dad's sweet, trusting Dad would apologize for being away and promise to bring her something special from his trip. When he returned, laden with designer bags or expensive jewelry, she would perform her gratitude with Oscar-worthy skill. 'You're such a wonderful provider,' she'd coo, slipping on whatever new bracelet or necklace he'd brought, while making sure Vanessa received her own gift as well. 'I don't know what we'd do without you.' I'd stand in the background, hands raw from cleaning, homework still waiting to be done, watching this performance play out. Sometimes I caught Vanessa smirking at me from behind her phone, but I kept quiet. What was the point? Dad was happy, successful, and in love. Wasn't that what mattered most? The years crept by, and before I knew it, I was in my senior year of high school. Tyler had graduated college 2 years ago, but was still living at home, claiming he was networking and looking for the right opportunity. Mostly this meant playing video games and occasionally attending interviews that mysteriously never panned out. Vanessa was in her 3rd year at the local college, which meant she too remained at home, maintaining her reign over the bathroom and her tradition of never lifting a finger to help. My 18th birthday arrived on a crisp spring morning with little fanfare. Diane had made it clear that excessive celebration wasn't necessary. "We'll just have a small family dinner," she announced over breakfast, not bothering to look up from her phone. "No need to waste money on a big party." I tried not to think about Vanessa's 18th birthday 2 years earlier, the rented venue, professional catering, DJ, and nearly 100 guests. Diane had spent weeks ensuring every detail was perfect, from the custom photo backdrop to the personalized party favors. At least Dad was home for my birthday dinner, though he left for another business trip the following morning. "Sorry, Princess," he said, hugging me goodbye. "Duty calls. We'll celebrate properly when I get back." After he left, I threw myself into graduation preparations, finalizing college applications, ordering my cap and gown, and working extra shifts at the bookstore to save money for textbooks. Everything seemed normal until that fateful dinner a week after Dad departed. We were all sitting around the table, me, Diane, Tyler, and Vanessa. I was pushing my food around my plate, trying to tune out Vanessa's endless chatter about her latest relationship drama, when Diane cleared her throat. "Evelyn," she said, folding her hands on the table like a corporate executive about to announce layoffs, "we need to have a serious conversation." I perked up, thinking maybe she wanted to discuss college plans. I'd been avoiding the topic with her, but perhaps she was finally showing interest in my future. "Now that you're 18, she continued, her voice syrupy sweet, "you're legally an adult, and adults have responsibilities. Starting next month, you'll need to pay rent. $500 per month seems fair." I choked on my mouthful of chicken. Tyler thumped me on the back, looking amused. "And what happens if I can't pay?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Diane's smile widened. "Well, then you'll need to find somewhere else to live, won't you? We can't have freeloaders in this house." I sat at the dinner table, my food now completely cold, as Diane's words hung in the air. The unfairness of it all, the years of being treated like a servant while her children lounged around, and now this demand ignited something inside me. A spark that had been smothered for too long suddenly burst into flame. "So let me get this straight," I said, my voice surprisingly calm. "Tyler, who graduated college 2 years ago and spends his days playing video games, doesn't have to pay rent. Vanessa, who's in her 3rd year of college and has never done a single chore in this house, also doesn't have to pay rent. But I do? I've made the decision that my children don't need to pay rent while they're getting established," Diane replied, dabbing her mouth with a napkin, as if we were discussing something as trivial as the weather. A strange sort of calm came over me then. Maybe it was all the years of bottled-up frustration, or maybe it was simply time for the truth to come out. I felt myself smile, not my usual attempt to keep the peace smile, but something different, something that made Diane's own smile falter slightly. "Well, that's interesting," I said, leaning back in my chair. "I won't be paying rent either, because this is my house." The silence that followed was absolute. Then Tyler started laughing, followed by Vanessa's high-pitched giggle. Diane joined in too, but her laugh had an edge to it. "What are you talking about?" she asked between chuckles. "This house," I repeated, not breaking eye contact, "belongs to me. My grandparents put it in my name before they died." The laughter died as they took in my expression. Diane's face cycled through a series of emotions: amusement, confusion, disbelief, and finally, something close to panic. "That's ridiculous," she spluttered, reaching for her phone. "I'm calling your father right now." Her manicured nails tapped aggressively at the screen as she put the phone on speaker. The dial tone seemed to echo through the kitchen. "Hello?" Dad's voice crackled through the speaker. "Logan," Diane's voice was tight, controlled. "Evelyn is telling some interesting stories about the house. She claims it belongs to her. That's not true, right?" The silence on the other end stretched for what felt like forever. "Logan?" Diane's voice rose slightly. "Well?" Dad cleared his throat. "Actually, my in-laws put it in Evelyn's name before they passed. I didn't think—" "You didn't think to mention this?" Diane was practically screeching now. "How could you not tell me this?" "I didn't think it was important," Dad said weakly. "It never seemed relevant." "Not relevant?" Diane's face was turning an alarming shade of red. "Not relevant that your teenage daughter owns our house?" She hung up before Dad could respond, nearly throwing her phone onto the table. The kitchen was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. Tyler and Vanessa were staring at me like they'd never seen me before. Diane took several deep breaths, visibly trying to compose herself. When she finally spoke, her voice was artificially bright, though I could hear it trembling slightly. "Well," she said, forcing a laugh that sounded more like a hiccup, "this has all been a big misunderstanding. Of course you don't need to pay rent, Evelyn. Let's just forget this whole conversation happened, shall we?" I'd lost my appetite completely. Without a word, I stood up and left the kitchen, heading for the stairs. As I climbed to the 2nd floor, I could hear urgent whispers from below Diane's harsh tone mixing with Tyler and Vanessa's agitated voices. By 6 the next morning, I was already awake, staring at my ceiling and thinking about how everything had changed in just a few hours. Around 7, I heard movement downstairs, the familiar sound of Diane making her morning coffee. I was about to head down for breakfast when I heard her voice floating up from the living room. She was on the phone, her tone hushed but intense. "Logan, you need to do something about this situation," she was saying. "Your daughter can't we need to get her to sign papers." "I know it's her house, Logan," Diane continued, frustration evident in her voice. "But she's making things difficult. She doesn't fit in here anymore. She's becoming a problem." There was a pause while Dad spoke. Even from where I stood, I could hear the uncertainty in his voice. "But Diane, it is her house. I can't just force her to. Nobody's talking about forcing her." Diane's voice took on that syrupy, sweet tone she used when manipulating someone. "We just need to guide her in the right direction." "What about those colleges she applied to, the ones in other states? You could encourage her to go to one of those. Tell her it would be good for her independence." My stomach clenched as I heard Dad's response. "Maybe you're right. I'll talk to her about moving away for college. It might be better for everyone." I waited until Diane hung up before walking into the kitchen, keeping my face carefully neutral. I busied myself with getting a bowl and some cereal, pretending I hadn't heard anything. Tyler and Vanessa shuffled in shortly after, both looking like they'd rather be anywhere else. Diane swept in last, her phone still in hand. "Good morning, everyone," she said brightly, as if last night had never happened. We all sat there, the only sound the crunching of cereal and the occasional clink of spoons against bowls. And then, as casually as if I was commenting on the weather, I said, "By the way, starting next month, you'll all need to start paying rent." Diane's piece of toast stopped halfway to her mouth. Tyler dropped his phone into his cereal bowl. Vanessa's spoon clattered against her plate. "Excuse me?" Diane's voice was barely a whisper. "Rent?" I repeated, taking another bite of my cereal. "I'm thinking $500 per person seems fair. That's what adults do, right?" "They pay their own way." Diane's face had gone pale, then red. She coughed, clearly having inhaled some of her coffee. "You can't be serious." "Oh, I'm very serious. But we're family," Diane sputtered, her composure cracking. "Family doesn't charge family rent. That's not how things work. Wasn't it you who just yesterday demanded that I pay rent?" I asked, still maintaining my calm demeanor as I stirred my cereal. Diane's face flushed. She set her coffee cup down with a sharp click against the table. That was different. I was trying to teach you about financial literacy, to prepare you for the real world." I couldn't help but laugh at that. Financial literacy? The real world? That's interesting coming from someone who's been living rent-free in someone else's house for 4 years now. "Listen here," Tyler started, but I cut him off. "No, you listen. You graduated college 2 years ago. You don't have a job. You spend all day playing video games and eating food that I help pay for with my part-time job. Maybe it's time for you to learn about financial literacy too." I turned to Vanessa. "And you, when was the last time you even did your own laundry? How dare you?" Diane's voice was rising. "After everything I've done for this family, what exactly have you done?" I asked, genuinely curious. "Made me do all the housework while your kids did nothing? Tried to charge me rent for my own house? Plotted with Dad this morning to try to get rid of me?" Her eyes widened. You were listening?" I heard everything, I confirmed, pushing my bowl away. "And you know what? Maybe you're right. Maybe it is time for some changes around here. So here are your options. Either start paying rent, all of you, or find somewhere else to live." Diane's face turned an alarming shade of red. This is revenge. You're just a spiteful, cruel child who's jealous of my children. Paying rent?" Vanessa scoffed, finally finding her voice. "Or what? Are you going to kick us out of the house?" "You ungrateful little brat, after we welcomed you into our family." Tyler joined in, standing up so fast his chair fell backward. "Your family?" I kept my voice level even as they all started shouting. "This is my house. My grandparents' house. You're the ones who moved in here, remember?" "You'll regret this," Diane hissed, pushing away from the table. "You have no idea what you're doing." "Tyler, Vanessa, pack your things. We're leaving." I watched in silence as they stormed off, thundering up the stairs. Diane paused at the doorway, turning back to me with eyes full of venom. "You'll pay for this," she spat. "Your father will hear about everything." I just sat there, finishing my now soggy cereal as the sound of drawers slamming and angry muttering filtered down from upstairs. Within an hour, They had thrown some bags together and were stomping out the front door. Diane didn't even bother closing it behind her, just stormed out to her car with Tyler and Vanessa in tow. The house felt strange in its newfound silence. I wandered from room to room, straightening things they'd left askew in their hurried departure, trying to process everything that had happened. It wasn't until mid-afternoon that my phone rang. Dad's name flashed across the screen. I took a deep breath before answering. "Hello? What the hell do you think you're doing?" Dad's voice exploded through the speaker. I had to hold the phone away from my ear. "Diane just called me in hysterics. How could you be so cruel?" Something inside me snapped. After years of trying to keep the peace, of staying quiet, of being the good daughter, I'd had enough. Cruel. I cut him off mid-rant. "That's interesting, Dad. Where was all this concern about cruelty when your wife tried to charge me rent for living in my own house? Did you think that was kind?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. When Dad spoke again, his voice was quieter, uncertain. "What are you talking about? Diane never..." "Don't." My voice was shaking now. "Don't you dare pretend you didn't know. I heard you on the phone with her this morning, Dad, when she was trying to convince you to make me move out. And you agreed to it. Remember that conversation?" The silence that followed was deafening. I could practically see him squirming, the way he always did when caught in a lie. "Evelyn, honey, you don't understand." He seemed to gather himself, and suddenly his voice hardened again. "You're destroying this family, Evelyn. Is that what you want? Diane is threatening to divorce me over this." I sank down onto the couch, the same couch where Vanessa used to sprawl for hours while I did her share of the housework. "She says she'll divorce you unless I apologize for what?" I asked quietly. "For owning my own house? For standing up for myself? She's my wife?" "Evelyn," Dad's voice cracked. "She says either you apologize for how you treated her and her children, or she's leaving me. Is that what you want? To ruin my marriage?" I looked around the living room at the photos on the walls, mostly of Diane's family. Now, with just one small picture of Mom still tucked away in the corner. When I spoke again, my voice was steady. "I'm not apologizing, Dad. Not for this." The line went dead. He'd hung up on me. My graduation day came and went like a blur. The ceremony was beautiful, but the empty seats in the family section felt like a physical weight on my chest. My best friend Hannah's parents took photos of us together and invited me to their celebration dinner. They didn't mention the obvious absence of my family, but their hugs lasted a little longer than usual. I spent the next couple of days sorting through college acceptance letters and trying to figure out my next steps. The house felt both empty and peaceful until a familiar car pulled into the driveway one afternoon. Dad got out first, followed by Diane, Tyler, and Vanessa. They looked like they were headed to a business meeting rather than visiting family, all dressed up and wearing identical stern expressions. I met them at the door before they could knock. "Evelyn," Dad said, his voice formal. Diane stood just behind his shoulder, nodding encouragingly, like he was a puppet and she was pulling the strings. "We've come to resolve this situation." I leaned against the doorframe, waiting. "I'm willing to forgive your recent behavior," he continued, choosing his words carefully. "We can all move back in, and things can go back to normal. But you need to apologize to Diane and her children for how you treated them, and, of course, drop this ridiculous idea about rent." I looked at each of their faces, Dad's forced smile, Diane's smug expression, Tyler and Vanessa's matching sneers. 4 years of memories flashed through my mind, countless nights of doing their chores, being treated like a servant, watching Dad slowly turn into someone I barely recognized. "No," I said simply. Dad's facade cracked. "Then you leave me no choice. If you can't be reasonable about this, if you can't be part of this family, then I'm done. I'm leaving and I'm disowning you. Is that what you want?" I felt oddly calm as I replied, "That's your choice, Dad. You've made it clear who you choose your wife and her children over your own daughter, just like you've been doing for years." Diane gasped dramatically. "How dare you, you ungrateful little witch. You've always been jealous of my children, always trying to come between us and your father." "One more word." I cut her off, pulling out my phone, "and I'm calling the police for harassment." "Your choice." The threat of police involvement shut her up fast. Dad started gathering the few belongings he'd left behind, working in tense silence. No one spoke as he packed his things into boxes, as he carried them to the car, as he made his final trip through the house where he'd raised me. He didn't say goodbye. Neither did any of them. They just got in their car and drove away, leaving nothing but tire tracks in the driveway. That was 6 months ago. I'm writing this from my dorm room at Northwestern University, over 1,000 miles from home. The house is being managed by Wilson Real Estate. They found good tenants, a young family with 2 little girls. The rental income more than covers my college expenses and lets me focus on my studies without worrying about money. I hear bits and pieces about Dad through mutual friends. He's renting a 3-bedroom apartment across town, still at his job with the fancy title and good salary. Diane got the renovation she always wanted: new granite countertops and stainless steel appliances in someone else's kitchen. Tyler finally found a job, though I hear he still lives at home. Vanessa dropped out of college but started a fashion blog. They're living their lives, and I'm living mine. Sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep, I look at old photos from before Mom died, back when Dad's smile reached his eyes and family meant something different. I wonder if we'll ever find our way back to being father and daughter again. I wonder if he ever thinks about me, if he regrets his choices, if he misses me like I sometimes miss him. Maybe someday Dad will realize what he lost. Maybe we'll find a way to rebuild what broke between us. Or maybe we won't. Either way, I know now that I'm stronger than I ever thought possible. Story 2, I'm Abigail Stewart, and I had a silver spoon in my mouth from birth. Not that I first recognized it, as they say. Growing up rich makes you believe that everyone lives the same way you do. Stewart Pharmaceuticals, the biggest chain of pharmacies in the state, was owned by our family. It was more than simply a company. My grandpa left it to me. He created it from nothing. And when I was a little child, my father, David, inherited it. My father's whole persona was shaped by the business. After work, he would enter our enormous Victorian home, untie his pricey tie, and begin discussing profit margins without even introducing himself. At dinner, Dad would proclaim another record quarter as my mother, Margaret, nodded in agreement and fiddled with her pearl necklace. My children will inherit this from me in the future. During these discussions, James, my elder brother, would just push his food about the plate. He was more interested in ancient civilizations than business margins, even while I was still playing with dolls at the age of 12. He would attempt to divert the conversation by bringing up his most recent backyard archaeological find. Dad, however, would simply dismiss it. But I was different. I like working at the pharmacy even as a child. By the age of 14, I was able to recite our inventory like the alphabet and knew the names of all of our regular clients. Dad saw, "That's my gal right now." He had been when I told him about a new display arrangement that improved sales or about assisting an elderly customer find the proper prescription. She has a business background. As James immersed himself further in history and archaeological publications, the change occurred gradually. Dad began taking me to meetings for work. By the age of 16, I was assisting with basic bookkeeping and conducting inventory counts. Abigail, observe and learn, showing me how to review contracts, my father would remark. One day, all of this will be yours. Finally, having someone to appropriately continue the family tradition made my mother very happy. She would suggest getting me pricey work clothes as a birthday present. James, however, received inexpensive history books. I recalled James's announcement that he would be attending college to study archaeology. Our formal dining room, the one with the crystal chandelier that costs more than most cars, was where we were having supper. "What are you?" Dad's fork clattered on the expensive china as he burst. "My son will now spend the rest of his life excavating. Please, David." Mom's face revealed as she tried to soothe him. She concurred with him. "It's my passion, Dad," James stated firmly yet quietly. "According to Professor Anderson, I have genuine talent, and I have already been accepted into the program. Possibility of poverty. We're business people, not dirt intellectuals," Dad yelled. I could tell James had made up his mind because of the resolute expression on his face. He got up from the table and stated, "So I guess I'm not a business person." Everything changed on that night. Dad gave me all of his focus and expectations. I wasn't the fallback option anymore. I was Stewart Pharmaceuticals' future. Despite the extreme pressure, I enjoyed it. At least I believed I did. Prestigious, competitive, and full of other trust fund kids just like me, Preston Business College was everything I could have imagined. With my platinum credit card and fancy clothing, I felt completely at home. I met Zane at that point. Of all locations, it was in the college library. This guy at the adjacent table saw me swearing at my laptop when I was having trouble with a coding project. "Do you need assistance?" He moved on to the chair beside me and asked. He had a faint accent that I couldn't identify and the sweetest brown eyes I'd ever seen. That was the beginning. Zane was really intelligent. He was at the top of his class and had received a full scholarship to study computer technology. Everyone was familiar with him. His efforts would serve as models for professors. He was very modest about it all, even though other kids would compete to have him on their team for group projects. I had to study for 3 coffee dates before I had the guts to inquire about his history. In a straightforward manner, he told me about his parents' immigration from Syria when he was a young boy, his mother cleaning homes and his father working in security. Was he 12 years old when he started coding, using a used laptop to educate oneself? After school, I used to do freelance work, he remarked. Bills needed to be paid. Actually, I didn't know. I had never in my life had to worry about finances. However, there was something about his delivery. No self-pity. I was much more impressed with him just for speaking the facts. A month later, we began dating. Zane was not like the wealthy males I had known as a child. Not because he had been taught it in etiquette class, but because he was truly courteous. He opened doors. The tiny, family-run eateries he went me to had delicious cuisine, and the proprietors knew him by name. After 6 months, he proposed not with a huge diamond, as my father had hoped. He gave me a plain silver band that he had kept for a stroll around campus at sunset. It was flawless. When I informed Dad I was engaged, he was overjoyed. In order to meet my fiancé, he first organized a large family dinner and invited all of our relatives. He was visualizing some successor to a Fortune 500 firm, and I could almost hear him. I saw I was mistaken as soon as we entered our enormous dining room. I saw the enthusiastic smiles on my family members' faces turn to barely disguised sneers as if someone had switched a switch. Patricia did, in fact, hold on to her jewels. Mom's glass of champagne froze in mid-mouth. Dad cleared his throat, breaking the eerie hush. Like a gunshot, the boom reverberated throughout our enormous dining room. Zane's hand was stiffing me beneath the table. "Thus, young man," Dad remarked, elaborating on each word as though addressing a kid, in that patronizing tone he often saved for his staff. "Describe your background to us. What is your actual place of origin?" Zane straightened his posture, preserving his honor in spite of the antagonistic environment. I liked how he spoke in a steady, polite tone. "When I was little, sir, my parents left Syria. Since I was 6 years old, we had been here." "What are your parents doing?" Dad curled slightly and pushed his lip. His face was harshly shadowed by the crystal chandelier above us, giving him a menacing appearance. "My mother is employed at Atlantic Corp as a cleaner, while my father as a security guard." Zane gave a direct response. His tone stayed proud and forceful. "Since I was old enough to support them, I have done part-time jobs, but I was lucky to be awarded a full scholarship to Preston." Patricia and Uncle George exchanged meaningful glances. Cousin Rebecca really snickered behind her manicured hand, and my mother virtually choked on her wine and grabbed her water glass, taking frantic gulps. The pearls around her neck shook with each drink. Every second, Dad's face became redder. His forehead vein, which only showed up when he was really furious, started to beat. "Well," he exclaimed, shoving his dish over so hard that the pricey china shook. "Young guy, I hope you realize that my Abigail has never desired anything and is used to a particular way of life. What specifically are you going to do to support her?" Before I could dive right in. In sharp contrast to my father's mounting rage, Zane answered coolly, "Mr. Stewart, I already trade in Bitcoin markets with success. In addition to creating plans for my own internet firm, cryptocurrencies, I have a sizable portfolio." A gruff chuckle that reverberated off the mahogany-paneled walls came from Dad. "You mean what Martha was sold by that con artist? The person who depleted her savings?" There was disdain in his voice. That's quite different, Dad. With my heart racing, I attempted to explain. James is actually quite well versed in blockchain technology. Even tech conferences have invited him to speak. Enough. The cutlery jumped, and the crystal glasses rattled when Dad slapped his fist on the table. Everyone at the table flinched at the sound, Zane excluded. When I see a con artist, I recognize him. Didn't your Aunt Martha also believe she knew better, Mr. Stewart? Zane tried to explain, remaining calm despite my father's expression darkening. I know you're worried, but I can reassure you. You're not understanding. With a shriek that made my teeth ache, Dad got out of his chair and scraped it across the wooden floor. His hands gripped firmly on the white tablecloth as he loomed over the table. My kid is not a good fit for you. You come from a low-income household and are a migrant. Our ideals and way of life are beyond your comprehension. We don't have you. I was horrified to see my father, who had taught me the value of professionalism and business ethics, reveal his actual nature. The saddest thing was witnessing the other members of my family nod in agreement, as though he was simply expressing their thoughts. Dad wasn't finished. He pointed his finger at Zane, his face contorted with anger. I can see right through you. You are aware that you are only another sour-faced liar attempting to seize my daughter's fortune. Please, David, Mom cut in, but not to protect Zane. She turned to face me with a look she likely believed to be maternal. You're too young to get married, honey. Prioritize finishing college. As we agreed, come work for the firm. You have plenty of time to consider getting married to someone better. Uncle George cleared his throat. Most likely, he is only pursuing the chain of pharmacies. These folks are smart, David. In this manner, recall the Martinez lad who attempted to date Rebecca and Patricia, who spoke about Zane as like he didn't exist. The same thing. Charm till they achieve their goals. As my relatives resumed their verbal abuse, I saw Zane's expression. Although he remained motionless and maintained a controlled appearance, I could see that his eyes were somewhat tightened, and his knuckles were whitened as he held his water glass. How could you possibly give her a future? Dad scoffed. Living in a small flat and wasting time on your fictitious online money while consuming microwave meals? That was it. Something broke inside of me. I got up so fast that my chair crashed backward. Quit! Stop it, everyone! My voice trembled with anger. You ought to feel embarrassed with yourselves. You're behaving like conceited, entitled snobs. Abigail. Mom clutched her pearls as she gasped. No, Mother, I'm finished. I extended my hand to grasp Zane's. Being a member of this family has never made me feel more ashamed than I do today. We're heading out, Zane. Come on. We made our way to the door. Behind us, my family mumbled and grumbled as we kept our heads high. As we grabbed our jackets, Dad's voice echoed loudly across the entryway. You'll be sorry you went out that door with him, Abigail. Can you hear me? Following all of the financial investments we made in your education and future, you owe us. I made one final spin around, addressing his inquisitive eyes. I owe you nothing more than the decency to go, rather than telling you exactly how I feel about you at the moment. As we went to Zane's car, I heard him yelling about commitments and bills, but I didn't turn around. I was discovering that certain debts weren't worth paying. A year passed in the blink of an eye. I graduated from college with Zane. He received the top computer science honors, me holding my degree in business. After moving into a little flat, we were content in spite of my family's pessimistic forecasts. I didn't think twice when Zane proposed that we be married that summer and quit waiting. Making the ideal wedding announcement on social media took me hours. I shared a lovely engagement picture of us, along with a sincere statement about how love has no bounds. Almost instantly, the answers began to come in. Cousin Rebecca is attacked for not being congratulated. It's unbelievable that you and that fortune chaser are still together. I'm out. And your poor folks must feel really sad, Patricia. Uncle George, we brought you up better than this. No Stewart worth his salt would go to this farce. Notifications continued to ring on my phone, each one more ruthless than the previous. When my mom's comment came up, I had to turn it off at last. You're committing the greatest error of your life. We won't be there. Zane hugged me and murmured that we could put things off as I sobbed for hours that night. I was tired of waiting for my family to change. Perhaps they simply needed more time. No, I wiped my eyes. We're getting married. with or without them? I was surprised to see James. In Egypt, my brother was engaged in a significant excavation, something about a tomb that had never been found. However, he arrived at our flat door 2 days prior to the wedding, smiling and coated in desert dust. Do you believe that I was not present at my younger sister's wedding? Pulling me into a bare embrace, he murmured, "In addition, you need someone to accompany you down the aisle." The wedding was modest yet exquisite. With fairy lights sparkling in the trees, we hosted it in a garden. One side of the aisle was occupied with Zane's family, kind individuals who had taken me in as their own from the beginning. With the exception of James and a few distant relatives who had the audacity to break the family boycott, my side was sadly vacant. A year went by. I had launched my own small business consulting firm, and Zane's it job was flourishing. Without any assistance from the Stewart fortune, we were constructing our lives together, one brick at a time. Then the invitation arrived. We would want you to attend David Stewart's 60th birthday party. As I read it, my hand trembled. Were they at last prepared to make peace after all this time? Zane gripped my palm when I presented it to him. "You make the decision, love," he whispered. "But we'll face it together, no matter what you decide." We wore our finest attire on the night of the celebration. I took hours to choose the ideal present. My father's favorite business book in a rare first edition, something that demonstrated my continued memory and concern. As we entered that well-known home, my heart was racing with anxious expectation. When we walked in, the room became quiet, like that first meal. But my hands were shaking as I pushed forward. I showed my father the neatly wrapped item. He didn't give it a glance, simply scooped it up and threw it away as if it were trash. As the lovely paper fell amid the other presents, it crinkled. The supper began like a masterfully staged act of brutality. Every query and remark was intended to cause pain. As my relatives took turns attempting to shatter my husband's spirit, I watched in horror. Uncle George swirled his pricey wine and drooled. "Are you still using your internet funds? Where have you yet to find a legitimate job?" Patricia spoke out before Zane could respond. "Do you know which salad fork to use, please?" She nudged my cousin Rebecca while giggling. "You must find these elegant dinners rather different from your usual fare. You're sporting a rather basic suit." My mom smirked as she watched. "I guess you can't afford fancy brands." "I wonder," said Rebecca, a cousin. "Before tonight, have you ever tasted truffle at all? They're rather pricey, you know." Even though they treated him like a circus show, I saw some space maintain his composure. He started with little and created a prosperous life, gained all the recognition he deserved in the computer industry. Because he didn't inherit his prosperity, they were behaving as though he was beneath them. When my father lifted his drink, it was the tipping moment. Loud enough to hush everyone, he said, "You know, to the table." If my daughter married below her level, I would always worry about what would happen to her. Boy, does she miss her shopping sprees and credit cards. Or have your little computer games allowed you to accumulate enough money to maintain the kind of life she deserves? I felt something crack within of me. I got up so quickly that my chair fell back. "You dare?" I was furious and trembling. "You act superior to everyone else while sitting here in your lavish home and beautiful clothing, but you are nothing more than little, vile individuals who have never achieved anything in your lives." The room fell quiet. "Do you believe your riches makes you deserving? Take a look at yourself. You're all so preoccupied with flaunting your wealth that you've lost sight of humanity." A scarlet flush came across Dad's cheeks. He matched my stamps and got to his feet. "That's sufficient. I'm tired of your lack of thanks. Your bad decisions. You're defending this seeker of fortune." His voice grew louder as he turned to the table. "I want to be clear about this. Abigail Stewart is no longer my daughter as of right now. She is totally cut off and disinherited." Then, with a flourish of the theater, he pointed to Michael, my cousin, who had been sulking at the other end of the table. "My nephew, who is my new successor, recognizes the importance of upholding our standards and family traditions." Michael rose, bending slightly as the family members erupted in cheers. "Uncle David, thank you. I won't disappoint you the way some folks have." I glanced at these individuals I had formerly referred to my family around the table. At my mom, who excitedly applauded my replacement, at my cousins, who grinned with pride, and at my aunts and uncles, who nodded their approval at my humiliation in public. Taking my husband's hand, I murmured, "Come on, Zane, this is where we're done. Indefinitely." The years that followed went by in a blur. Zane has only recently begun to invest in cryptocurrencies. He started his own software company with that money, creating cutting-edge AI solutions for companies. Tech Vision Enterprises was worth more than $500 million in just 3 years. An empire had grown out of the same online money that my father had noted. I was pleased to see my husband's name start to show up in tech journals and business publications. 30 under 30 Tech Visionary of the Year, Most Innovative CEO. The fact that success hadn't altered him was what I was most proud of, even though the praise kept coming. Even though his clothes were now tastefully expensive rather than cheap, he still remembered the names of all the employees, opened doors for people, and wore simple clothing. I wanted to track down my father and show him how foolish he had been by showing him all these headlines. However, since that terrible birthday dinner, we had not communicated. And to be honest, that silence had brought me peace. Then came the invitation. "You are invited to join us in celebrating Rebecca Stewart's wedding." Incredulous, I gazed at the thick cream envelope. We received an invitation to her wedding from the same cousin who had made fun of Zane's table manners and his attire. Take a look at the mail that arrived. That night, I held up the invitation and said it to Zane. After carefully reading it, he gave me that loving look I had fallen for years before. Perhaps we ought to leave. Family is regarded as sacred in my culture, even when they cause us pain. So there we were, entering the Ritz-Carlton's magnificent ballroom, the venue for Rebecca's wedding. It was a surprising response. "Oh my God, is that the CEO of television, Zane Hassan? Did you see Tech Weekly's interview with him? I've heard that he recently signed a contract with Microsoft. Mr. Hassan, is it possible for me to take a photo with you?" The same family members who used to sneer at my impoverished immigrant husband were now scurrying to catch his eye. Former detractors were now fervent admirers who pressed business cards into his hands, begged for pictures, and sought investment advice. I watched as Zane handled it all with characteristic grace, smiling for photos, answering questions politely, making everyone feel heard and respected, even people who had never been as polite to him. "Your husband is absolutely brilliant." Patricia, the aunt who had made fun of his table manners years before, was also present. "Did you know he was featured in Forbes?" I just smiled, thinking how funny life can be. The fortune hunter that accused him of being had built his own fortune, bigger than anything the Stewarts had ever imagined. But unlike them, he wore his success with humility and kindness. I should have known something was off when my parents made a beeline for our table. Mom was wearing her most ingratiating smile, the one she usually reserved for wealthy potential investors, while Dad had plastered on his best business face. "Darling," Mom cooed, kissing my cheeks and Zane, "we've been following your incredible success in the news. So proud to call you family, I couldn't help myself." "Really? The same poor immigrant you couldn't bear to have at your table a few years ago." They flinched but recovered quickly. Dad cleared his throat, loosening his collar, which I noticed wasn't from his usual luxury brand. "Water under the bridge, sweetie. Family is family, right?" Then came the underlying reason for their abrupt change of heart regarding the wedding appetizers. The story poured out. Michael, their treasured replacement heir, had almost ruined Stewart Pharmaceuticals. In his zeal to decrease expenditures, he'd signed contracts with dodgy vendors. Now they were facing various lawsuits for supplying counterfeit drugs. "The FDA is investigating," Dad added, his voice lowering to a whisper. "The banks won't touch us. We're in trouble, Princess. The legal fees alone." Mom wiped at her eyes with her napkin. "We've had to mortgage everything." Dad reached across the table, placed his hand over Zane's son. "I am aware that our relationship started off poorly, but your family supports your family, right? All we need is a loan to get us through this. Millions of people ought to do it." I noticed pity soften on Zane's face. The ever-forgiving spouse of mine was already grabbing his checkbook. I stopped him by putting my hand over his. "Family is helpful. Family," the first spoke again. I made a humorous call. I recall that you explicitly said that we were no longer family. Indeed, did you not? To sell me twice already? Abigail. That cautionary tone from my upbringing returned to Dad's voice. I learned some important things from you after all that we have done for you. Dad. I interrupted him. Such are how to avoid giving cash to strangers. You say it all the time, don't you? His face took on that recognizable purple hue. You're a little ungrateful and about upholding excellent standards. As the wedding DJ encouraged everyone to raise their glasses to the happy couple, I carried on, my voice carrying. I apologize, but I don't hang out with folks who sell phony prescription drugs to sick people in order to make money. Dad sprang to his feet, exploding. You dare? I reared you, taught you, and rejected myself after everything that I had done for you. I stood quietly for the last time. Twice. If you want to sell me again, let's do it 3 times. It won't alter my response, though. As we left the reception, I took Zane's hand. The curse of my father is still with us, just as it was years ago. I was smiling, but only this moment. 3 years have passed since then. I get family news updates from James. I don't ask. Stewart Pharmaceuticals, a powerful company, filed into bankruptcy. I grew up in a mansion that was sold at auction. In order to pay for legal bills, Dad and Mom sold their expensive automobiles and Mom's priceless jewelry and downsized to an apartment. That supper years ago, when Dad referred to Zane as a wealth hunter, comes to mind occasionally. Life has a humorous way of revealing people's true selves. My respectable family lost everything due to shortcuts and greed, but my impoverished immigrant husband used honesty and hard work to build an empire. But what do you know? I discovered that true riches has nothing to do with money. It's about surrounding yourself with people who support you in times of need and who encourage you rather than depress you. I'm the wealthiest lady in the planet by that metric. Story 3. For years, I've kept this tale to myself, but recent events have convinced me that I must tell it. Perhaps it will be helpful to someone else experiencing a similar situation. I'll divide it up because it's lengthy. As a child, reputation was the most important factor in my life. Both of my parents taught at Riverside Prep, one of those elite private schools that CEOs and politicians bring their children to. Mom was an AP English teacher. For them, their standing at school was crucial, and Dad was in charge of the mathematics department. Remember who you are, Cindy. Every time I did something a little out of line, Mom would mention it. You're the daughter of a teacher. People are always observing. Growing up, I heard that statement more times than I can remember. In our home, it was practically a mantra. Getting consecutive A's isn't a significant accomplishment. They are expected, and we are all affected by your actions. Their only child was me, their ideal small project. They kept an eye on everything. My friends, my clothing, my grades, and even how I stand at dinner parties. In hindsight, I should have recognized the warning indications of their dominance. But that all appears natural when you grow up in that kind of atmosphere. When I started dating James Mitchell in my junior year of high school, things really started to get better. His mother was on the school board, and his father controlled half the downtown real estate in our city. My folks were overjoyed. We've been looking for a relationship like this one. One evening when I was working on my schoolwork, Mom informed me, James is quite concerned about his future, and the Mitchells are such a reputable family. Dad nodded in agreement and said, Just think, Cindy, you could have such a wonderful life ahead of you if things work out. In fact, initially, James and I got along rather well. He was intelligent, humorous, and appeared to be aware of the strain that comes with having high-stakes parents. We would discuss our future goals for hours on end. I intended to become a financial analyst, and he wanted to follow in his father's footsteps and work in commercial real estate. He would half joke that we might be such a power couple, but he wasn't serious. The real estate tycoon and his wife, a skilled financial counselor. Our parents enjoyed gathering for supper and discussing our futures, while we sat there grinning and nodding. On the surface, everything was just as they had desired. I was admitted into Winston College's esteemed business department, graduated as valedictorian, and began my freshman year there with James. Our parents were quite proud. They succeeded in their mission. Their daughter was headed towards the ideal life they had imagined. Life at college got off to a perfect start. At Winston, James and I both poured ourselves into our studies. and it seemed like everything was coming together just so. My work was commended by my business analytics teachers, and I continued to retain my flawless GPA. James and I developed a more serious connection since my parents anticipated that we would spend the most of our leisure time together. Midway during the sophomore year, we had grown close. It seemed like a logical step. At that point, we had been dating for about 3 years, and we discussed getting married after graduation as if it were inevitable. I believed I had it all figured out when I was 19 in love, and 19. Then the morning sickness struck. I initially tried to tell myself it was just a stomach ailment or stress. However, I was unable to deny it after 2 weeks of rushing to the loo in between lectures. I didn't want a chance stumbling across anybody I knew, so I purchased 3 separate pregnancy tests from a drugstore across town. I can recall looking at those little pink lines while I sat on the floor of my dorm room. Good. The 3 of them. I could hardly contact James to come over since my hands were trembling so much. "What are you?" When I informed him, his face became pale. "No, this cannot be taking place. Not right now." I tried to remain composed and added, "I know it's not the best time, but we can work this out together. We've always discussed starting a family." Finally, James interrupted me. "Yes. After I graduate from college, after I take over my father's company, after we get married and settled in. Not right now. How will this affect my future, do you know?" It seemed as if someone had hit me. "What about the future?" He paced my little dorm room and stated, "There's only one solution here. You should get an abortion. Now we are unable to conceive a child. Everything would be ruined." "No," I answered firmly. "I'm not going to do that. This child is ours. If my parents find out," he interrupted, "they'll cut me off. I'll lose all I've worked for. Cindy, you can't do this to me." But while James and I were fighting, someone else had already done it to me. My phone began to buzz. The name of my mother appeared on the screen. "Now come home." She spoke in a chilly tone. "We must talk about this matter. I was ill. How did you?" James gave his parents a call. They gave us a call. "Come home right away, or we'll come get you." The 2 hours I spent driving home were the longest of my life. Both sets of parents were waiting for me as I entered my parents' front door. Their disgusted expressions made me want to vanish. "You dare?" The anger in my mother's voice trembled. "You have no right to shame us in this way." "What a dumb girl you are," my dad spat. "Do you know how this will affect our school's reputation?" Miss S. Mitchell was in a fit of tears. "Our James has a really promising future. Now he cannot be restrained by a child. I'll take care of the child myself," I muttered, encircling my tummy with my arms for protection. "Neither James nor any of you have any expectations from me." An unmarried mother. My mom gave me a sour laugh. "A single mother and our daughter. Have we raised that? Her life is ruined by a little whore who spreads her legs? We will not permit it. According to my father, your careless actions won't damage our reputation. Credibility?" What I was hearing was unbelievable. "We're talking about your grandchild right now." Miss S. Mitchell's words were strong. "There is an error here that must be fixed. James still has his entire life to go. Everything would be ruined by this." Hours passed throughout the conversation, but that was hardly a conversation. It like a well-planned assault. "Cindy, consider your future. How do you plan to support a child?" my father would ask. "Where are you going to reside? If you insist on maintaining your education, we will continue to fund it." My mom also said, "Do you want it that way? To squander your whole future?" I was sitting on the couch in our living room, the same couch on which I had devoted many hours to planning my ideal future and studying for exams. I could live where my mother's voice was keen, obtain a job, and take a vacation from school. Not here, of course. You are not allowed to bring such a disgrace into our house. One of my aunts, perhaps. My voice trailed off as I began. The mother's sisters lived abroad, and the father was the lone kid. I had nowhere to go. For the most part, James sat quietly, gazing at the floor. His parents spoke for him all the time. Morgan and Reed Investments has offered James an internship for the upcoming summer. "Do you want to ruin it for him?" his father would ask repeatedly. "How unconcerned are you with his future?" I was gradually worn down by them. Every strategy I proposed was foiled. All the possibilities I raised were shattered. No work would be sufficiently compensated. There would be no cheap apartments. There would be no future. My mother finally took me to the doctor in her own car. The physician seemed worried but professional at the first examination. "I must warn you," she added softly, staring at me, "that this operation may affect your future ability to conceive. There are possible dangers. We've talked about all of it." My mom cut me off. "We've already decided." The physician gave me a glance. "I must speak with you, Miss Thompson. Are you aware of the dangers?" I was unable to talk. I simply nodded. The weeks that followed went very quickly. After my physical recuperation, I went back to Winston for the spring semester and devoted myself fully to my studies. At one point, James muttered something about how it was for the best, but I left him in the middle of his sentence. Over spring break, we didn't talk again. I obtained a job as a barista at a coffee shop close to university instead of returning home. After that, I took on shifts throughout each holiday. My folks didn't protest. As long as I kept up my GPA and didn't cause any more issues, they were pleased to have me gone. They were happy to continue covering my tuition. During one of our quick phone conversations, my mother stated, "We're glad you finally came to your senses. For the best, everything turned out. However, nothing seemed to be the finest. Now nothing felt quite right. I completed my homework, went through the motions, and maintained my flawless marks. But I was broken on the inside. I was also aware that things would never be the same. I was hired by Morgan & Reed Investments as a financial analyst after I graduated. Ironic, given that it was one of the companies James had been frantically trying to get an internship with. However, I earned my seat on my own merits by excelling during my interviews and graduating with a summa cum laude. A pleasant habit was established throughout life. I lost myself in my profession, creating financial models and analyzing market patterns. My flat turned to become a haven for me. No expectations beyond my own, no judgment. Then came the night of the annual holiday gala for the corporation. My team leader persuaded me to go even though I was on the fence. She said, "Cindy, you can't hide behind those spreadsheets forever." David and I met there. He was a partner in the business, but not the stuffy, haughty kind I had anticipated. When I first met him, he was talking to the housekeeping crew about basketball. Sincere curiosity about their March Madness forecasts. I joked that I needed his signature on some reports and hoped I wasn't disturbing a major strategic discussion. He had the sweetest smile I had ever seen as he glanced up. Actually, Jose was just outlining the reasons why this year's bracket is likely to be a total bust. A month later, we began dating. David was not like any person I had ever met. Sincere, compassionate, and utterly indifferent to appearances or position. A year later, over Chinese takeaway in my small flat, he proposed. I told him I didn't need a lavish wedding, only us. And we did just that. His sister and best friend were witnesses to a modest ceremony held at the courtroom. No fancy gowns, no social paparazzi, no murmurs of reputational worry, just honesty and love. I kept my folks in the dark. We had resorted to sending each other quick SMS on Christmas and birthdays at that point. I didn't provide information, and they didn't inquire about my life. After 3 years of marriage, my mother announced, "Your father is sick," without introducing herself. "He needs surgery. You ought to attend." As we arrived at the house where I grew up, David clasped my hand. It had the same appearance, a well-kept lawn with immaculate white trim. Everything is in its proper place. When my mother saw David get out of the car, her eyes widened. "Who is this?" "My spouse," I said plainly. 3 years have passed since our marriage. What came next was an intriguing change. The harsh charges of being barred from the wedding came first. However, their tone abruptly shifted when David brought up his role as executive director, and they discovered that I was now a senior financial analyst. As though the last few years of stillness hadn't occurred, my mother said, "Oh, darling, we've missed you so much. You need to visit more frequently." Then the true cause for the call was revealed. Their insurance didn't cover the whole cost of Dad's costly surgery. May I be of assistance? I was doing so well, after all. Right now, I consented to assist with the medical expenses. It may have been weakness, perhaps it was forgiveness, or perhaps I simply wanted to achieve success. In spite of everything, for a second, I allowed myself to think that perhaps the past could remain in the past, since Dad appeared truly appreciative. David and I began discussing starting a family of our own after Dad's recuperation. The moment seemed right, and we both wanted kids. However, nothing occurred month after month. We first made an effort to not worry. These things require time. Remaining optimistic, David would remark. However, we made the decision to consult a reproductive doctor after a year of failure. Dr. Martinez was thorough but courteous. She gathered a thorough medical history and performed a number of tests. The question I had been dreading then came up. Have you ever been pregnant or had a child? My throat became parched. David was unaware of what had transpired in college. I had never known when to tell him. However, the truth had to be revealed while seated in that antiseptic office. Yes, I muttered. An abortion. At the age of 19. Professionally, Dr. Martinez nodded while taking notes. She gave me the news that rocked my world after going over all the test findings. The process of termination. She kindly stated that, in addition to the scarring that followed, you had caused some difficulties. Unfortunately, there is very little possibility that you may become pregnant. All those years ago, I felt the room swirl. My mother had disregarded the hazards that the clinic's doctor had warned about. I was now paying the price for a decision that had never truly been my own. I had to tell David everything that night. We were sitting on our back patio, where we generally do our future planning. And I told everything. The forced abortion, my parents' response, and my college pregnancy. I cried. I'm very sorry. I ought to have informed you earlier. If this changes anything, I get it. David interrupted me as he drew me into his embrace. Hey, he murmured quietly. Look at me. Nothing could alter my feelings for you. Nothing. For a time, we sat in quiet. Before he spoke again, he put his arms around me. There are other methods to start a family, you know. We might investigate adoption. Give a youngster in need of a home. His remarks were a lifesaver. That evening, we looked into adoption organizations and regulations, planning for a future that was different from what we had anticipated, but equally full of love. In the meantime, an awkward pattern emerged in my recently re-established connection with my parents. The identical question was asked at each visit. When will you start giving us grandkids then? I sidestep, modify the topic, discuss employment or your father's recuperation, to avoid the truth at any costs. They had already demonstrated that looks were more important to them than their own grandchild. Previously, Dad was fully recovered, but I wasn't going to give them another chance to criticize my decisions. I continued to give them money each month. It may have been habit. It may have been guilt. Or perhaps I still harbored the notion that achieving financial success would eventually win their sincere acceptance. The invitation to Thanksgiving was unexpected. My parents no longer hosted many holidays because they said they were too draining. However, my mother insisted that we go this year. We have some friends coming over, she added. Not very fancy. Only a few school coworkers and their families. I ought to have been more aware. There were at least 30 individuals in the home when we got there. Every cornerstone of the neighborhood's educational community. They are all members of my parents' carefully chosen social network. The evening began, as was to be expected. Everyone remarked on how pleased my parents must be, how successful I had become, and how amazing David's job was. The same hollow talk I'd heard as a child. Then came the turning point in the story. With a wine glass in hand, my mother positioned us beside the dessert table and spoke loudly enough for the folks in the vicinity to hear. Miss S. Peterson was just showing me photos of her new grandson, Cindy. Adorable. How soon will David and you have grandchildren? Grandparenthood is already enjoyable for everyone else our age. Prior to my deflecting, David gave me an honest response while squeezing my hand. We're actually investigating adoption. The application procedure has already begun. The ensuing hush was deafening. Several colors of red passed across my mother's face before she virtually yelled adoption. Are you insane? People turned. The discussion ceased. The attention of the crowd was captured by my mother. She was everyone, just like the seasoned instructor. Is this unbelievable? Instead, my daughter wants to adopt, even though she might have wonderful grandkids of her own. Please, Mom. I gave a hiss. It's not the right time or location. Dad rushed over from where he was standing by the hearth. Why all this bullshit about adoption? Are you attempting to humiliate us once more? Do you know anything about the backgrounds of these kids? Addicts to drugs? Criminals? Parents with mental illnesses? Do you wish to introduce it into this family? You're creating a commotion. I spoke aggressively. This is a personal issue. However, the harm had already been done. Encouraged by my parents' response and relaxed by holiday beverages, my parents' friends began to voice their opinions. You ought to start a family of your own, Miss S. Peterson said, dear. When it comes to adopted children, you never know what to expect. Another visitor mentioned that my cousin's buddy had been adopted. A terrible error. The youngster struggled with a variety of issues. Consider your family's history, another person yelled. My parents were obviously happy that their social circle was supporting them as they stood there nodding along. They were wearing the same arrogant looks they had when they had others band together against me because I was pregnant all those years ago. Something broke inside of me. Are you curious as to why we are adopting? My guys broke through the cacophony of critical muttering. Do you truly wish to know? All right, I will explain the reason behind the deathly silence in the room. My mother's warning was there in her eyes, but I was done preserving their good name. Due to complications from an abortion I had when I was 19, I am unable to conceive. You two made me have an abortion because you were more worried about the opinions of your neighbors than for your own daughter and grandson. There was a gasp. Halfway to her mouth, Miss S. Peterson's wine glass froze. You said you were going to throw me out, stop my schooling. Unless I fix the issue, leave me with nothing. I went on, my voice clear yet tremulous. The physician cautioned that difficulties may arise. But you do recall what you said, Mum. We've already decided. Not me, we. My body, my child, and my future are all up to you, Dad, and the Mitchells to decide. I looked around the room at the astonished expressions. We are adopting then. Because it is currently my only choice for starting a family because of my parents' urgent need to preserve their priceless reputation. The ensuing hush was deafening. My mother then did something that threw me off guard, even though I should have anticipated it. She launched an offensive. You dare? She let out a cry. You unappreciative girl. How dare you enter my house and spread such vile falsehoods? Her hands shaking, she turned to her visitors. She's telling lies. She has always struggled and has a tendency to place the blame for her errors on other people. Without notifying us till after the fact, she got herself into difficulties and had an abortion. We wouldn't. Are you serious? I interrupted her. Are you really going to lie in front of all of these people? Show them the medical documents, David. My spouse took out his phone, which included copies of my previous medical records, documents I had obtained for our fertility expert from the facility. However, my mother lost it all before he could pull them up. Leave now, she let out a scream. Leave my residence immediately. Once more, you have destroyed everything, like you usually do. Leave now! I could hear my mother attempting to repair the damage inside the car as David and I made our way there. She gave her guests additional drinks while speaking in a high-pitched fear. My dad remained silent. When it counted, he simply stood there, quiet as ever. It was a calm journey home. Without pressuring me to speak, David held my hand the whole time, simply being present. I immediately rushed to my laptop and stopped the monthly automatic transfer to my parents' account as soon as we arrived home. My mother didn't call for precisely 2 months. Her name popped up on my phone screen as I was going over our home study documents for the adoption agency. A part of me wanted to hear what she might have to say, but I almost didn't respond. Next Thanksgiving, their youngster was pulled out of school by the Petersons. Without even saying hi, she started. I no longer receive invitations from Miss S. Chen to her book group. Are you aware of the damage you have caused to our reputation? In fact, after everything, I laughed. Reputation was her primary priority, she went on to say. Your father and I deserve compensation for the damage you've caused. The societal expenses were being incurred, and the monthly support you were giving hardly covered them. At work, people are treating us differently. In order to make justifications, we have had to explain things. Excuses? I interrupted, implying that the falsehoods you uttered at Thanksgiving were the same ones you have been telling yourselves about what you did to me for years. We acted in your best interest. And you pay us back like this? By propagating false information and then severing our financial ties. What worked best for me? I spoke to her in a firm voice now, more composed than ever before. What did David and I do last week, do you know? We had an appointment with a therapist that focuses on assisting adoptive parents with sorrow and infertility. She clarified something crucial for me. The abortion wasn't the only thing you did. It has to do with control. Control has always been a factor. You dare not. Another tool of control was the money. By going on, you believed that you still had control over me as long as I was paying you. That's finished now. I'm finished. You're a little ungrateful. After this call, I'm blocking your number, both of yours, I said. We are nearing the end of our adoption home study, David and I. We're hoping to pair up with a youngster in need of a home in a few months. A youngster who will never have to worry about their well-being being subordinated to the reputation of their family. A youngster who will get unwavering affection. She snarled, "You're making a big mistake. Don't come running back when you realize that." I instantly blocked both of their numbers and canceled the call in the middle of their speech. Then, feeling lighter than I had in years, I returned to my adoption documents. 6 months have passed since then. David and I are working today to complete the nursery for the baby girl who will be born next month. Because of our story, her birth mother especially chose us. She desired for her daughter to grow up with parents that valued love over outward appearances. I occasionally consider what my parents are losing out on. However, I recall that they made their decision a long time ago. They placed notoriety above love, appearances rather than relatives. I'm making a different decision. My kid will know as she grows up that she is loved, wanted, and accepted for who she is. Mel's circumstances? Mel? Anticipations? Mel. Worry about the opinions of the neighbors. Final revision. We now have our daughter at home. She is flawless.